Hello students, let us start today's session. Today we are going to start a new study note number 4. It is basically activity based costing study note. Study note number 4 has 4 concepts. Study note 4 covers 4 concepts. One is your activity based costing management, in which you are going to study ABC, activity based costing, versus the traditional costing of charging overheads. How to add the overhead cost in computation of cost per unit. When you compute cost per unit, how do you charge direct cost and indirect cost? Direct cost and indirect cost. Indirect cost is called overheads. Now, direct cost can be directly attributable, measurable to the production. But indirect cost has to be apportioned, has to be allocated in computation of cost per unit. So, traditionally there was a different method, but now ABC is more or a more recognized method of charging overheads. And 3 more concepts are to be covered. One is just in time. This is also a theoretical as well as practical concept. Then there is another concept, ERP, enterprise resource planning, and last concept is benchmarking. These 2 concepts are theoretical concepts. This is theory as well as practical, and this is also theory as well as more of practical concept. So basically this study note is a small and good study note, confidence building study note, because you will understand each and everything. 100% understanding is guaranteed in this study note. So it's a good study note. So let us start with first concept, that is ABC versus traditional costing of charging of overheads. Let us now start these 2 methods, activity based costing method and traditional method, conventional method. Now basically these 2 methods focuses on what area? These 2 methods basically tells you how much overhead should be charged. There are various words we can use: charged, absorbed, applied, how much or recovered. This is also another word. How much overhead should be charged per unit of finished good. When you produce finished goods, you have to do the costing of that finished goods. How much is spent on producing finished goods? So when you do the costing of, when you add the cost in producing finished goods, there are 2 types of cost: direct cost and indirect cost. Now the problem comes in calculating the indirect cost, because it is indirect. It is not directly attributable. You cannot directly see or measure how much is spent in producing 1 unit. So indirect cost apportionment is a tough task. And in doing apportionment or allocation of overheads in or charging overheads on 1 unit, there are 2 methods available to you: activity based costing and traditional method. So what I will do, I will take a simple example. That example is also given in your CMA module. Okay, I'll take that example, and through that example I will explain you practically how these 2 methods give us different results while charging overheads in doing the costing of per unit of finished goods. So let us do that example. Let us understand this concept practically, then we will talk about the theoretical aspects of these concepts. Okay, so let me write one example. Example is, suppose in a company, this is example. Activity based costing. Yes, this is an example. Suppose in an organization, let us say company X, annual manufacturing overheads. You understand overheads? Overheads implies indirect expenses. While doing manufacturing, indirect expenses that incur are approximately, let us say, 20 lakh. Now this 20 lakh is divided in 2 parts. 2 lakh rupees of expense and 18 lakh of rupees of expense. This 2 lakh rupees of cost is directly attributable or directly involved in setting up the production machine. Do you understand what does setting up cost implies? This 2 lakh cost is basically setting up cost. This expense is incurred on setting up of the machines. Now, what is setting up of machine implies? Setting up of machine implies that when you start the production, before every time you start the production is done in batches. Whenever you plan to start or produce a batch, before that setup of machine is done. Basically, the planning activity takes place. First of all, what activity will follow, which activity is planned properly. Machine equipments indicators are monitored, whether the machine's oiling is perfect or not, whether its battery is charged or not, whatever the indicators are there. Then safety measures are properly adhered to or not, that is checked. Then documentation is to be done, so proper documentation papers are available at that time or not, because whenever the batch starts producing, everything quality monitoring is to be done at the same time, so documentation is done simultaneously. So basically, the setting up of machine implies that is preparing of machine for production. So for preparing of machine for production, basically it is a maintenance of machine, safety measures, whether the workers have proper equipments to do the production, and product quality you have to monitor. So everything is checked before starting the production. So hence setting up cost in simple words implies preparing the machine for the production. Okay. So this 2 lakh was spent annually in setting up the machine. Every time a batch is run, machine has to be set up properly. Okay. This remaining 18 lakh is attributable, directly involved in the production activity. In production activities, okay. So basically this 18 lakh is for production activity. When the production is carried out, that time this expense is incurred, and this 2 lakh is incurred before the production takes place, that is when the machine is set up. Okay. Now we have classified this 20 lakh in two parts. We are trying to explain you what is activity based costing. First, understand how we are trying to charge the indirect expense, trying to compute the cost per unit. Now suppose if I give you some more figures on this. If I say in an year annually, suppose in a year 400 times machine setup is done. 400 times machine setup is done, and in every batch 5,000 units of finished goods is produced. And if I tell you one more information, that is 50 units are produced in 1 hour. These three informations I have given you in this area, and related to this area, this expense is directly incurred during the production time when the production takes place. So if I want, I can write here that it is correlated with company's 1 lakh machine hours. Basically, when this expense was done, 1 lakh machine hours were run. While running 1 lakh machine hours, 18 lakh rupees expense was done. Okay. So now how this whole cost will be charged, that we have to understand. Basically, I just want to know how much is spent in producing 1 unit. That is it. So there are two methods of charging. One method is activity based costing. Now carefully observe how traditional method of charging indirect expense and ABC method differs. Okay, so let me do the calculation through ABC method first. Now under ABC, the cost has already been classified in two parts, right? And this cost is attributable to setting up activity. We can say this cost is incurred because we are undertaking this activity. If we do not undertake this activity, then this cost will not be incurred. So hence this cost is bifurcated on the basis of activities. This cost is related to this activity, and now this activity is done how many times in a year? 400 times we have set up the machine. That is why this expense has incurred. Now if you have reduced your activities, let us say instead of 400 times you have only set up machine for 100 times, definitely this cost will reduce. So basically this is the cost driver. Machine setup is your cost driver. Now what is cost driver? Cost driver implies the reason for which the cost is increasing or decreasing. If you increase your cost driver, basically this is the reason why cost is increasing or decreasing, or cost is coming. If you increase your number of setting up times, your cost is going to increase. If you reduce your number of setups, then the cost will reduce. So basically this is the factor which is driving your cost. Okay. Now these are the words we will discuss later on also: cost driver, cost pool, cost activity, but little bit of introduction I am doing here. So basically what is cost driver? The factor which is driving your cost, the factor which leads the increase or decrease of the cost is called cost driver. So what is the factor which is leading your cost increase or decrease? This is machine setup, number of times machine setup. Now number of times, if the number of times machine setup increases, the cost increases. The number of machine setup times decreases, your cost decreases. So let us do one thing. We know in a year how many times we have set up machine? 400 times. Okay. So under ABC, what will be done? The cost will be apportioned in two parts. First part is, the cost will be apportioned in two parts. That is, first is the first stage one is called allocation based on activity. That is activity allocation. That is 2 lakh rupees of cost is incurred because you have 400 times machine setups, right? So what is the cost for one machine setup? Can we compute this? Yes, we can compute. So this is coming out to be 2 lakh divided by 400. This is coming out to be rupees 500 is spent basically every time we set up the machine setup. Now this is your cost per activity, right? One time you do the cost, then this is the activity. Now the second allocation, stage 2 allocation, is basically, it is called where the cost is assigned to product of batch. Now this is also very important. Please see. Using heavy language will only make the concept tough. Otherwise, a layman person also can do this calculation. Basically, 2 lakh rupees is spent on doing 400 times activity. So every time you set up a machine, 500 rupees cost is spent. Now second is, every time you set up the machine, a batch is run. How many units are produced? 5,000 units are produced. So basically, every time you set up the machine, you run a batch and 5,000 units are produced. So basically, can I say after spending 500 rupees, you are able to run one batch and you can produce 5,000 units. So basically, 5,000 units are produced after spending 500 rupees. So rupees 500 is spent to produce 5,000 units. So how much is spent on one unit? So if 500 divided by 5,000 into 1, this is coming out to be 0.10 rupees per unit. So we have allocated the cost per unit. Now the cost was 2 lakh rupees. Now it has been allocated per unit cost. How much? Rupees 10 per unit, right? Now this is called batch allocation. The cost has been, first of all, first stage cost was allocated to activity. Now during that activity, how much units are produced, that we have observed. One batch was produced. In one batch 5,000 units are produced, 6,000, whatever the units are produced, apportion that cost. So this is the cost which is coming, and this is the cost per unit that we have apportioned. Okay, now let us go to the second part of the cost, 18 lakh rupees. Now this 18 lakh rupees is incurred on what activity? When you run machine, then this cost is incurred basically. So how many hours you have run the machine? 1 lakh hours. Okay, so very simple. Again the same thing. First of all, we will allocate the expense on the activity, then we will allocate the cost to 1 unit. Okay, so again next cost, second part of the cost, remaining cost 18 lakh. Now stage 1, allocation based on activity. Now this cost is incurring because you are running machine. So 18 lakh is attributable to 1 lakh machine hours. You run machine, you incur cost. So how much is the cost for 1 machine hour? So 18 lakh if we divide by 1 lakh, you get rupees 18 per machine hour. So basically 18 rupees is spent on the activity of running machine. Okay, now stage 2 allocation. Stage 2 allocation is what? Allocation to 1 unit of product. How do you do? Now during this activity of running machine, how many units are produced? What is the activity? Running of machine. Earlier what was the activity? Setting up of machine. During setting up of machine, we used to produce 5,000 units at one go. Now going back, if we check, it is given 50 units are produced in 1 hour. Very simple. Okay, so whenever during 1 hour of machine 50 units are produced, now we will allocate this cost. 18 rupees is spent during 1 machine hour, and during 1 machine hour, in 1 machine hour, and in 1 machine hour 50 units are produced. So simple allocation, basic allocation, rupees 18 is spent if we produce 50 units. So for producing 1 unit, how much is the cost? So 18 divided by 50, it is coming out to be rupees 0.36 per unit. Now total 20 lakh rupees of cost has been apportioned, allocated using activity based costing. Now the total manufacturing overhead cost per unit under ABC is how much? If we go back, the first cost came out to be 10 paisa per unit, and the second cost came out to be 0.36 paisa per unit. So it is coming out to be rupees 0.46 per unit. We have allocated this cost using ABC method. Now if just to make it more fancy and more decorated concept, okay, so let us give them some formulas. Now how did you do allocation? Allocation was done in 2 stages. One is your activity allocation, then your product allocation or batch allocation, whatever you can call it. Now this was the cost and this was your activity, right? So you divided cost per, so you computed what? This is what basically cost per activity. Then you divided the cost per activity with the number of units produced during that activity. So if you want to make a formula, you can make a formula out of this. Basically cost per activity is then divided further by number of units worked on or produced during that activity, Then same thing we have done here also, that is the cost and the activity. You get the cost per activity, and during that activity how many units are produced. Now this is the tradition, this is the ABC, activity based costing. Okay, very much justified name. Now there is another method which is traditional method. In traditional method, we do not classify the cost in these two parts. This was a simple classification. In a more better way, under ABC, 20 lakh cost will be classified into various activities. That is, what is the cost driver for which part of the cost, that is computed. But under the traditional method, the whole 20 lakh will be apportioned using a blanket rate. I'll tell you. If we go by traditional method, in the old days, what we used to do is, now if we use the traditional method of allocation of overheads, traditional method of allocation of overheads, then very simple, 20 lakh is the cost. This cost is incurred, use any blanket rate, blanket rate means blanket factor, I can say. Basically we need to give a reason why this cost is incurred. Give any reason. Normally the reasons used to be that labor is working, so that is why this cost is incurred, or machine is working, that is why this cost is incurred. So in our example, machine hours are given to us, so we divide full 20 lakh cost amount in 1 lakh machine hours. Only one reason is given to such cost, because this is an indirect cost, so no pain is taken in allocating this cost into various activities. Directly single blanket rate, blanket factor is used. Okay, this is an indirect cost is incurred because we are working, either labor is working or machine hours are working, so directly attribute to that. So 20 lakh divided to 1 lakh, how much it is coming? It is coming out to be 20 rupees per hour. Then in 1 hour 50 units are produced, so rupees 20 divided by 50 units. So what is the cost of 1 unit? So if we divide by 50, this is coming out to be rupees 40 paisa per unit. Now this is the overhead cost per manufacturing, overhead cost per unit. Now see, the valuation is so different. Under traditional method, 1 unit is assigned 40 paisa, but under the under the ABC technique, the cost has been allocated 0.46 per unit. So there is a change, there is a difference in allocation of overheads under the ABC, under the traditional. Traditional method doesn't look into detail that why this cost is incurred, what is the driving force for the cost to be incurred, what are the activities undertaken because of which this cost is incurred. No detailing is done. If your organization is a small organization, this method can be adopted. But if your organization is a very big organization, and for example, don't you think it is right? Suppose there are 2, 3, 4, 5 products manufactured in the organization, and some products take lot of setup times. Lot of times machine has to be set up for them. So if a particular product, for particular product, many times machine have to be set up, then the machine setup cost must be allocated more to that product. And if there is another product which requires less machine setups, not many machine setup is to be done, 15,000 units can be produced in one machine setup, then less cost should be apportioned, so that customer pay the right cost for whatever the product customer is buying. He should be paying the right cost for it, whatever the cost is incurred in producing that product. So this ABC method gives more accurate allocation, more appropriate allocation of overheads. Now we have understood how this ABC works. Please write down this example. Then we will practice some questions which is given in the CMA module. No question is complicated question, simple questions are there. Okay. And with each question we will be able to understand more concepts. So please write down this example of activity based costing. Pause the screen and write it down. Pause the screen and write it down. I'm changing the sheet. Pause the screen and write it down. I'm changing the sheet. Pause the screen, please. Now in the ABC method, it appears, okay, if more activity is required to produce finished good, more cost will be allocated. If less activity is undertaken to produce the finished good, less cost will be allocated, because cost is distributed among activities. But under the traditional method, I'm changing the sheet, please. Under the traditional method, a blanket rate is there. 1 hour of machine is 1 hour of work is done on the product, 20 rupees is to be charged. Okay, during 1 hour 15 units are produced, this is a blanket rate. Now whether the more activities are undertaken, less activity, doesn't matter, 1 unit will be charged 0.40 paisa in the costing of overheads. So this is okay method if your organization is a small organization. But when organization is big, expenses are very big, and multiple products are manufactured in which some finished goods require less activity, some finished goods require more of activities, then cost allocation should be appropriate. Their ABC method is preferred. So kindly pause the screen and write it down, and let us practice more concepts, more questions, and then you will observe what is activity pool, what is cost driver, everything will come into picture. Yes, please observe question number 1. This is study note number 1. All questions, as you know, are from CMA module only. So question number 1, activity based cost management. This is the chapter's name. Question number 1, the budgeted overheads and the budgeted, that is, these are the planned overheads, and this overhead will be incurred, and the cost driver, the reason why this cost is getting incurred, what is the driving force, that is the cost driver. Cost driver volumes, what does volume implies, you will just get to know. So basically overheads estimates and the reasons behind that cost is given in the following table of XYZ Limited are as follows. Now what are the various costs that are getting incurred, will be incurred? Overheads, material procurement, material handling. Material handling means, if you talk about raw material handling, from the godown, the raw material is taken to the factory place, the production site, and if the finished goods work in progress, all material is handled at different stages. Setup cost, maintenance of the machines, quality control is also an activity, and machinery. So these are the cost pool, basically the name of the cost, the overheads. This is the total estimate overheads that on material procurement 5,80,000 cost will be spent. Now what is the reason why during material procurement cost is expended? Because of the number of orders. The more time you place your order of raw material, more number of times you place the order, more times you have to procure the material. If you place less number of orders, less procurement cost will be incurred. The setup cost 4,15,000, number of setups. If you perform less activity, obviously the activity cost will reduce. Material handling. Now material is passing from the godown to the factory, then to the finished goods godown. So more of movements, less movements of material take place, then definitely material handling cost will be reduced. So your production and plant layout should be such like that the material movement should be the least. The plant layout